Hi, and welcome to the third lecture of the Economy of Francesco School. I'm Matteo Rizzoli, and I'm part of the scientific committee of the Economy of Francesco. Be aware that we are surveying your presence at the school through a link which you find on the chat, both on Zoom or on YouTube. So if you follow that link, you will get to a Google form by which we collect your presence here. And we will also use the chat both on YouTube and on Zoom to collect questions during today's lecture. And we are very glad today to have Professor Nelson speaking and being with us today. Julie Nelson is currently an emeritus professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, and she's also the editor of the Journal of Business Ethics, among many other activities she carries. She is one of the founding members of the movement of feminist economics that in the last 30, 40 years has been trying to enrich our discipline, economics, with enrich it with a view on gender issues and inclusivity and so on and so forth. To what extent this movement has been a complete success in helping our profession to be that aware of these issues is still open to debate, but we will ask Professor Nelson, what's the state of the economics in this respect? Her work is of great importance to what we do here at the Economy of Francesco, because she has been working really at the intersection of many topics. And just look at our villages. I mean, the villages of Women for Economy, the village of Work and Care, the village that have been working on inequality. All issues are related to her research agenda. The specific topic of today's lecture, which is care, has been also already mentioned and already faced in the last year in the Economy of Francesco. Think, for instance, to the previous seminar we had with Nancy Folber, which, by the way, is a co-author of Professor Nelson, and also by, of course, Jennifer Nadesky. That was one of the keynotes lectures during our event in November. Let me mention one of the contributions of Professor Nelson, which I particularly like. This seminal paper co-authored with Nancy Folber for Work on For the Money, in which this was a 2000 paper published on the American Economic Review, and in which they document the progressive entering of the markets into the realm of the family, into the sphere of love, which, I mean, this is an issue that really goes at the earth also of the etymological meaning of the work of the word of economics, as we have repeated many times here at the Economy of Francesco. Economics comes from the roots of the word, comes from the family, from the oikos and the nomos, and this work by Professor Nelson really remembers that. So enough said for me. I really thank Professor Nelson on the behalf of our scientific committee. I wish to all people here a very nice and productive and lovely afternoon. But before listening to Professor Nelson, I want to give the floor to Luigino Bruni, who is the scientific coordinator of the Economy of Francesco, for a few words.
Just one word is thank you to Professor Julie Nelson. We are very proud for this occasion. We know the quality and the importance of her work, as Matteo said, for many issues of Economy of Francesco. She holds a really magisterio on our topics. Then for me it's an honor to have you, Professor Nelson, and then we are really looking forward to listen to your words and your ideas. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Luigina Bruni and the Scientific Advisory Panel for inviting me here. I very much enjoy particularly talking to younger scholars. Let me get my PowerPoint up here. Is that visible? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Okay, great. So what I'm going to talk about, economics and the ethics of care. There was one line that really jumped out for me. Oh dear, I'm not getting this to advance. Let me see. Oh, there we go. Jumped out at me from Pope Francis's encyclical on climate change and inequality. A lack of physical contact and encounter, encouraged by the disintegration of our cities, can lead to a numbing of conscience and to the tendentious analysis which neglect parts of reality. A true ecological approach must hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And I totally agree with that. I'm just going to try humbly to add a little bit to that in today's talk. I think there are other things adding to the numbing of consciousness and the tendentious analysis which neglect parts of reality. Those seem to me to very well describe a lot of the biases in mainstream economics. And I'm going to talk about these not just as things that are left out, but they're actually biases that make the findings not just partial, but actually false in a lot of ways. So really are biases. So let's start with some common beliefs about capitalism. And I would argue from a lot of my reading that a lot of these beliefs are held both by advocates of capitalism and a lot of economics professors, and by a lot of critics, a lot of people from philosophy, sociology, the humanities, activists who criticize market using economies. And these assumptions are that it is somehow essential to capitalism that people be purely self-interested in their commercial and business dealings, that the essence of business is making the most profit possible, that the laws of markets are inexorable, like the law of physics, the law of supply, the law of demand, the demands of the capital markets, the demands of competition, that this stuff is all somehow outside of human society, and works essentially like a juggernaut, like a machine. And finally, that the social and ethical aspects of humanity, yes, they exist, but they're not in the economic realm. Those are fine for society, for the family, maybe for politics, but they're in some different realm from business and markets. I went to a talk by someone else one time at a big economics convention where they talked about adding care to economics. And their pictures of economics and care were something like this. If you search or you do a web search on capitalism or economics or markets, you get something like a very mathematical looking stock market diagram. You want to illustrate care and you get something quite different. This middle class wealthy nation, mother and baby on a pure white background. Mother and baby seems to be the iconic care. And this is true not only for care of children, but I found it very interesting, Hans Jonas's work, The Imperative Responsibility, which is cited quite a lot by people working on ecology and ethics. In there, he goes through quite a lot of sophisticated philosophical theories about why we should care about the earth in the age of technology. But what he really ends up to with is this, the always acute, unequivocal, and choiceless responsibility which the newborn claims for itself creates the ought to do of the subject who in virtue of their power is called to its care. So even among ecological thinkers, I think there is some recognition that this is what really demands an attitude of care. But if you look at those pictures and you think, well, how do we put care into capitalism? It looks like it's a lost cause, right? I mean, these are two entirely different kinds of spheres. I think that is not essential. I think that is not necessarily true. I think it was even invented by economists. And when I talk about economists here, I'm particularly talking about the mainstream, or what's sometimes called the neoclassical orthodoxy, which, while there are a lot of variations around the edges, still dominates a lot of economics research and teaching. So if you think about what economics is and what it's taught to be in, to millions of students in introductory classes all over the world, it's defined around markets for goods and services, and or around rational choice, people maximizing utility, maximize profits. It focuses on individuality and assumes those individuals are self-interested and compete with each other. And it models itself as a positive science. You have to learn a tremendous amount of mathematics to be an economist. And there's this belief that mathematics somehow makes us objective and scientific. Well, think for a minute about what was left out when economists decided to frame economics in these terms and limit itself to these sorts of models and types of analysis. What was called not economics, the left out stuff, social life and family, our bodies and the rest of nature. In most economics textbooks, you won't hear anything about our bodies need to eat. You will hear only about our brain's rational choices. Relatedness, interdependence, cooperation, the fact that we might actually pay attention to someone else's well-being and work with them instead of against them. And anything having to do with ethics, normative, what should we do? We think we're being objective doing our economic analysis, and that we've somehow skipped all of that. Now think for a minute about the cultural gender connotations of these two sides of the chart. It's very clear that economists chose the sort of masculine side of common Western cultural dualisms that locate women as closer to nature, women as more caring, women as more interdependent, men as more autonomous, competitive, mathematically oriented, all of this. Business as a sphere primarily for men. So if you recognize this, there's some options that might appear. One is to say, sure, that's just economics. That's the only way to be scientific. It's squishy to think that people might care about each other, and we want to be rigorous and tough. So we just keep on doing economics this way. Another temptation might be to flip the tables and say, well, this kind of economics is destroying the planet. We have to completely get rid of it. Create an economics that's entirely about social life and nature and cooperation and ethics. To me, that's not the solution. It seems to me that if you choose just either one side of this or the other, you're playing with half a deck. You're really blocking out whole realms of reality, whole realms of ways of creating knowledge. So instead of thinking it has to be either or, I try to think about what is the best of both and. Another objection people might have to thinking about both and instead of just the left side of this is, well, isn't this what economists learn from studying the economy? That people in markets make rational choices, that they compete, et cetera. No, economists did not learn this from studying the economy. Economists learn this because they love math and physics. The belief in self-interest only, individual behavior, this kind of stuff came from economists. And you can really trace it back to what you can think of sort of a physics envy. The first sort of scientific field to come around was physics and mechanics, got the whole Industrial Revolution going, was very influential. So for a lot of time, people thought science was physics and mathematics. John Stuart Mill was the first person to propose that economists focus just on the ambition of individual people to get wealth. And And he did this because his idea of science was geometry. He says that explicitly. In order to be a rigorous geometric like science, we have to start from some basic assumptions and then work out the conclusions. Well, Mill's idea of these maximizing self-interested agents was picked up by the neoclassicals in the late 1800s, who realized you could formalize it all in calculus. So then you get the kind of graph that's on the right. And to many people in the business press, in academia, everywhere else, now think that this is what a firm is. A firm in its essence is a profit maximizer, but didn't come from studying what firms actually do. Comes from this math envy. And of course, this idea that people are perfectly self-interested means that you would never run a firm well just because you're being paid, $500,000 a year. You'll only run a firm well if you're incentivized with stock options. Nobody would ever be so responsible as ever to do something good that's not incentivized by money. And that's how we got the top, fraction of a 1% in many countries just taking off in terms of income, radically increasing inequality. So those habits of economists don't come from actual economies. They come from physics envy, and they come from this bias towards masculine is better, feminine is worse. So what I'm going to say is that these common beliefs about capitalism that I talked about that are often shared by people on both the right and the left, whether you want it to go away or you think it's great, they're all parts of a tendentious analyses which neglect parts of reality. They completely rejected the actual presence in the economy of all of those things that standard economics has left out. So what would be a better understanding? I think it might be a good idea to actually start with studying the actual history and behavior of individuals, organizations, and nations. If you do that, you discover, if you can take off those blinders that said we can only study economies this way, you find that the opportunistic profit-only ethos destroys companies and economies. There are a lot of business leaders and investors talking about this now. People think of firms maximizing profit just as a unitary thing. There's a lot of very rich investors actually really angry these days that managers are making off with so much money. The managers are acting very opportunistically, and even workers and investors are getting kind of tired of it. So if you read a number of people, even within the field, they're starting to recognize that this sort of short-termism, always just looking at the next quarter profits instead of the long-term health of the company. And certainly the long-term health of the companies includes what happens with climate change and environmental deterioration. Opportunistically just looking in the short run and for yourself will ultimately destroy everything, right? We can also see that competition as well as cooperation as well as competition is everywhere. And I say for better and worse. We tend to think often, if you come at this from an ethical point of view, that competition is bad and cooperation is good. And competition is in the marketplace, cooperation is in our more social and family kind of lives. Think again, if you find yourself in that habit of thinking. Economists do talk about cooperation a little bit, but they call it collusion. And it's a bad thing. It leads to price fixing, right? They could just call it cooperation, but they don't like that. Sounds too mushy. So we invented another word for it. Competition also happens within nonprofits and within families. Okay, it's not like people never compete to decide who gets to go where to go on vacation, right? There's not spheres of pure cooperation or pure competition. They're everywhere. And could you ever run a business without people actually cooperating? If everybody act completely opportunistically, nothing would ever get off the ground. So because there's social and ethical aspects, even in these spheres that we think of as outside of them, like inside businesses, we can really say that social and ethical aspects of life are everywhere. There are some people who will say you can drop your ethics at the door when you go to work. Doesn't really work very well. And most people who are not, leading economists writing in big journals, or Milton Friedman or somebody like that, recognize this, that your ethics don't disappear just because you cross a threshold. Also, neoliberal monopoly corporate capitalism, which is a pretty good description of the way things are going in a lot of our countries these days. That is emphasis on so-called free trade and free markets. Well, what's actually happening is a lot of manipulation by very powerful elites to get government regulation and trade and everything to go their way. That's very, and you can find many, many instances, examples of where this is very harmful. But it is not capitalism as a whole. There's nothing in the essence of capitalism that says it has to grow forever. I mean, that's one thing that has been made up. There's nothing that says it has to be exploitative. There's nothing that says it has to create products that wear out right away. The idea of creating a product so it'll wear out and people have to buy it again, planned obsolescence, didn't even get going in the US until the 1940s, 1950s. There was nothing in production back earlier that said, let's make this to wear out. Clothes lasted, telephones lasted. Some of this stuff is new. If you look across countries, Swedish capitalism and US capitalism and Japanese capitalism are all very different. So different time periods, different regulatory regimes, different countries shape it differently. The essence is not some big monster that's coming after us, as you would think from some writings by critics. And it's not as inevitable as the proponents suggest either. This is really not about free markets, what we see in the world. It's really more about people in power using that power. Also, the work of caring for people and the planet is at the core of sustainable economies. I don't think I need to convince you of all of that, but I will just list it there. And then a PS, I'm not going to talk about this particularly today, but our beliefs about gender certainly need re-examination. Where would you start out in teaching economics about this, teaching students from a different kind of view? I've thought about this a lot because I co-edited with Neva Goodwin and some others a series of introductory economics textbooks called Economics for Humans. And when you're writing a textbook, it has to include a lot of the usual material. But we frame that differently. Instead of saying, this is how the economy works, supply and demand, maximizing profits, maximizing consumption, we phrase this at, this is the way some people have thought about trying to explain how the economy works. So you can include all of that, but you can also include a lot of other things. Rise of consumerism and what that's doing to the planet, for example. More emphasis on inequality. And we define economics not about markets or rational choice, but the study of the way societies organize themselves to provide for the survival and flourishing of life. Or I actually have to add a little addendum to that, or fail to do so. Economies right now are mostly, many are failing to do so. What are the major activities? Most principles textbooks will tell you their production, distribution, and consumption. We added another one in there at the beginning, resource maintenance. If you don't care of your resources, your people, your minerals, your trees, everything else, how are you ever going to produce anything? The first word that occurred to me to describe that was stewardship, but it had a little bit too much of a religious and ethical connotation in English, and we wanted to make it sound more neutral and just common sense, so we called it resource maintenance. At the end of teaching one of these courses, I told my students that resource maintenance was not in most of the books, and they were really, what? how could that be? You know, how could you? And then you can bring in stuff about ecological stuff all the way through the book, because you've said this is the foundation for everything else. And when you think about, you know, how do we know what we know in economics? How do we know what we teach? How do we know what we do research on? This idea that math creates objectivity is really total myth. It doesn't, mathematics creates internal consistency. But as soon as you say that this equation represents a firm, you're making all sorts of assumptions and all sorts of normative assumptions about what's important and what's not. and what's valuable and what's not. So what really characterizes good methodology, good science, is careful inquiry, systematic, not just going off the top of your head, obviously, but also openness to new evidence and evaluation by larger communities. There's a lot of stuff going on in the social sciences now about a replication crisis, p-hacking. People are starting to realize you need to do more replication, you need to do pre-registration and other things, because individual economists alone following some recipe don't get to objective knowledge. It really takes a community to verify what goes on. I started, I might finish a little early, which I hope will give us some more time for questions and discussions. I started the picture with this talk with two pictures. Stock market as iconic economics, and the mother and baby as iconic care. So how do we bring them together? I have a couple of images, and they're both gendered, partly because I think that to get a lot of men to think about care as being part of their domain, that image of the woman and the baby really isn't going to work. And to get a lot of women to think about economics as their sphere, that stock market one might not be so ideal. So how do we get men to think more about care as being their domain, and that care belonging in this sphere of production? I suggest an image of diligent husbandry. Husbandry is kind of a often out of use word in American life these days, because we don't have that much animal husbandry left. But husbandry refers to the old, farming and animal care that went on. You had to husband your soil to make sure it would still grow things next season. You had to take care of your sheep, make sure they were healthy. You probably grieved when they died, even if you were going to shear them or eat them at some point, you still had to care for them, watch out for them, tend them. So this is a sphere of both production and care. I think people, both men and women, can also husband businesses, can husband corporations, take care of them. There's responsibility, there's responsiveness in this image that is not in the image of the self-interested CEO. That's one that's more gendered masculine. Let's talk about powerful care. Care is not just about coddling your baby and going coochie coochie coo. If you've ever watched one of those babies come out, there is a lot of power. There is something really amazing about that. It is powerful. It is not limited just to white middle class folks. We need power in our caring, and we need to get that into our caring for the poor, caring for the earth. So in my conclusion, I just want to encourage some veering away from a couple things. I think young people rightly tend to be idealistic. If you don't have some big goal, kind of what's the point? So you should have some kind of big goal. But I hope that in pursuing this economy of Francesco, you won't fall into what I think of as a romantic idealism, which tends to be this, that masculine economics has ruined the world. We need to make everybody cooperative and giving and altruistic and interested in each other. I'm afraid my view of human history and the people around me, and even I live in a cooperative household of 6 adults. It's not all sweetness and light and rainbows, even at the most basic level of cooperation. So this isn't just going to appear out of nowhere and replace everything going on. So let's try to avoid romantic idealism. What I think is often even more annoying is self-righteous idealism. Yes, we know there's a lot of people out there who want to stay selfish and who want to run for-profit businesses and everything else, but we now know what the right thing is to do. And we need to convince all those bad people out there to be like us. Wouldn't the world be great if everybody was just like me? That's often very tempting. If you think about it, though, it's got some really big dangers. The world would be better if everybody was just like me, so we have to get rid of the Jews and the gays. That led to a very large purge. Okay, so when you get into this idea that your vision of the world has got to be the best one, and you got to force everybody else into it, think a little bit more carefully. So let's try to avoid that. What is left is what I call pragmatic idealism. And this is a more open, non-dogmatic idealism. As I've written a book about trying to bring markets and care together called Economics for Humans, where I try to argue that we really need to mobilize all sectors of economic and political life in the service of global survival and justice. It's not just going to be governments that get us out of this mess. It's not just going to be cooperative businesses or nonprofits that get us out of the mess. It's not just going to be private business that gets us out of the mess, but it really needs to be all hands on deck. We need to figure out how to work as individuals everywhere and in institutions everywhere to care for the poor, to care for our planet and survival. And I think a lot of you got copies of the papers I'd sent Paolo, but just in case anybody didn't, I'll put up a brief list of some of the papers ideas I referred to. And I think I actually finished a few minutes early, which I hope will give more time for participants to react.
All right, thank you very much. This was a very interesting talk. I didn't know about the meaning of the word husband. That's really suggestive. It's very interesting. So I now give the floor to our three discussants, the first one of which is going to be Serena Ionta. Each one of them will introduce herself, and then we will have a talk with Professor Nelson. So please, Serena, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Professor Nelson, for your speech. I am Serena Ionta from CO2 of Inequality Village. I'm a PhD student of Roma Tre University. I am very grateful to be here. I truly believe in the necessity to restart from a feminist and an environmental care economy. I take the opportunity to focus on some elements. The neoclassical theory that established itself at the end of the 1800s is a real scientific paradigm. It offered the basis for the contemporary study of economics, influencing the way in which economics is taught today in all the universities of the world. I really like the expression you suggested in one of your articles, between a rock and a soft place, where the rock place is precisely the neoclassical orthodoxy and the mainstream theory, in which economics is described as a complex of rational agents, which seek their personal interest by maximizing utility or profit. I'm thinking of Wallacean general equilibrium. In this framework, the achievement of economic optimum is the solution of logical economic problems. It is susceptible of mathematical treatment that leads to predictions and certainty on what happens in the present and what in the future. Clearly, in this rock place, crucial factors such as sociology, anthropology, philosophy, or more generally, as regards the interaction between people, specifically care, have been totally or most removed from economic study. On the other hand, we have what you call a soft place, or a more humanistic, holistic, and even spiritual vision of the economy, which focuses on agents as belonging to a community in which care, ethics, and responsibility towards the environment are driving factor of the analysis. The soft place clearly is not affected by mathematical maximization or nor is it used in order to obtain certain predictions. As you suggested, its purpose is to analyze the relational complexity and the social aspect of economic individual. I think many of the EOF community are very attracted to precisely this soft place, especially when we study problems inherent to the feminist economy or environmental economics. It is clear that doing a soft analysis can be more realistic and also useful to tackle the problem at 360 degrees. At the same time, I believe, however, that all we just said concerns the identity of an economist, what or who they should be or not to be. Namely, everything makes their same profession. If economists are those who have to give concrete answers to governments, I am thinking of a central bank that must set interest rates, or academic circles that have to advise on the best policies to respond to certain problems. Let's think specifically about the environmental problem. A rock ecological economist is able to mathematically formalize through analytical or econometric tools, for example, the so-called EDSG, what could be the best environmental policy in order to obtain the expected results, or at least to try to reach them. What I want to say is that we live in a world that asks, especially from those who do this job, concrete answers and very precise evaluations. If this is the role of the economist, then inevitably it is necessary to take a more analytical and rigorous path. Although it may be heroic in assumption, we can affirm that models are used in prediction and the rock street is able to replicate reality, and therefore to have predictive power to carry out policy assessments. If, on the other hand, we look at the other side of the coin, we know well what economist is by nature also a social scientist, who must take into account holistically humanity. Man, in fact, is only Homo economicus. In this sense, I ask you, Professor, how is it possible to reconcile these two realities, both important in my opinion? How to reconcile this need for certainty regarding the concrete actions to be carried out and the related policies with what turns out to be the true nature of man and woman? I am thinking of Antonio Genovese's definition of Homo homini natura amicus, which is characterized by reciprocity, natureness, and cooperation, especially when it comes to care. How would you respond to a young researcher of EOF school who desires to reconcile this tension within his or her research? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Serena, for those great comments and that great question. If I believe I heard you saying that for advising policy, for needing predictive power, we need these mathematical analytical methods that give us precise and certain results. If you look at economists' actual track record at predicting things, it is not necessarily so great. The mathematical methods certainly give precise results, but whether they're actually predictive is really another question. And I'm not disrespecting mathematical methods. For certain things, they are the appropriate thing to do, but we put far too much faith in them. I mean, the big example of this, which economists seem to have just kind of briefly recognized and quickly forgotten, was the 2008 financial crisis, right? Economists completely missed it. You talk about predictive power. There were like two, people we should have been looking at the empirical effects of what was going on, in housing markets. I remember right after the crisis hit, looking at a Wikipedia article on how one of these bogus financial instruments should be priced. And it was page after page of very precise equation. The true answer is, are these worth? Zero. Okay. So yes, I do think that the tools are good. The idea that they actually predict and give us some certainty is very wrong. And that belief that somehow the math gives us certainty is certainly leading a lot of environmental policy down the wrong path. I believe that economist tools of mathematics are very useful for things like cost effectiveness analysis. If we want to put more renewable energy in here, should the next step be wind or biofuel, or something like that, right? That's a very useful level at which to use analysis. But economists have come out with these integrated assessment plans, which claim to say how fast GDP should grow, for the next 20 years. And it's all based on these mathematical tricks with discount rates and Negishi weights that prevent any solutions to inequality. And those, I think, are entirely bogus. They come from this idea that we think we can control what's going on, as becoming increasingly clear as the evidence from science comes on, further, that we do not control. And so we really need to think of mathematics less as a way that we can predict and control, but more as a tool that can serve us in a world that is actually very uncertain. Thanks.
All right, so Tracy, you go.
Okay, hi, hopefully everybody can hear me. My name is Tracy Freiberg. I am a PhD candidate in public and urban policy at the Milano School for Policy, Environment, and Management, which is in the new school. We keep changing names and it's a mouthful every time. But I'm also a visiting professor of economics at St. John's University in Queens, New York. So I'm coming to you all from New York City. So I wanted to just reflect a little bit and thank you, Professor Nelson, for all the work that you've done. I think a lot of the people that are at this webinar can relate to what I'm about to say. And when I first started studying economics, I didn't really know what the turnoff was for me, but a very short version of what I guess kind of made me a little bit nervous about studying economics is that I would listen to economists just fight about what variables they were using in their equations and like which equation was the best one to use. And it was, again, a little bit of a turnoff for me. So I ended up working in insurance for 7 years and eventually came back in. And it's because of people like you and the work that you do that I eventually found my place here. And everybody who's on this webinar now, we've all somehow found each other in the midst of a global pandemic, which is really something special. So the first question I had, and I think you already have been thinking about this because it was a little postscript on one of your slides, but especially in the United States, as the way we identify ourselves becomes more non-binary. So maybe it's not just male, female anymore. And that goes into other ways we identify ourselves, right? Whether it's race or age or ability or where you're from, your religion, any way we identify ourselves. How can we better analyze what's happening in our markets if it's a non-binary way of looking at how humans interact with each other? I don't know if this is the same question, but for me it was related. But how do we include non-traditional households in this arrangement? So we typically look at households as male parent, female parent, and we know in a lot of different cultures that is certainly not the norm. So my first larger question to you is how do we account for these non-traditional ways of looking at this unit of analysis that's traditionally individuals and households?
Takes me a minute to get unmuted there. Thank you, Tracy. Great question. Yeah, I give the longer versions of my talk and go a little bit more into that. But yeah, the whole binary that I put up there about masculine and feminine with the two sides of the table and two kinds of pictures is really trying to address what I think was the beginning of this historical division in the field of economics. But it does relate because there has been a lot of work within gender studies and a lot of younger people questioning this gender binary. And yet in the US, a lot of the backlash against that says, no, we are essentially either male or female. That seemingly neglecting people who are actually, chromosomally intersex and, that there are other categories there and that people don't always identify with what their body is. But there's a lot of people saying that, we are essentially male or female. A lot of the people questioning that and saying, no, gender is a lot more fluid, still say the essence of a business is to make maximum profit. And I try to sometimes when I'm talking to these folks, get them to loosen up a little bit on that. But it comes from our same, actually, Serena's comment leads into this. We like to be certain. We like to have easy categories. And to some extent, I would say that is just practical, that it's hard to live your life if you're questioning all your assumptions all the time. So in a recent piece I wrote, and this could be controversial, I'd love to discuss it with more people, but I was asked to talk about gender, and I addressed the issues of, these big cultural associations with what's masculine and what's feminine, and the idea of, various kinds of non-binary issues by thinking of how we think of traffic signals. And there's a child's game we play in the US called a red light, green light, where when you say green light, kids can run, and when you say red light, they have to stop. So we grew up playing red light, green light. So a child's version of traffic signals is it's either red and you go, or green and you go, or red and you stop, right? As we get older, we also notice that there are yellow lights. That means, slow down, stop if you have to. We also know that there are flashing red lights, which say you can stop and then go again. We also know if there's a police officer in the intersection, you're supposed to ignore the lights entirely. So why can't we have a grown-up understanding of gender? Just as we have a grown-up understanding of that old game of red light, green light.
I like the analogy. Yeah, and my other question is, I guess, selfishly an advice question, but again, I've talked to several people that I think are on this call, so hopefully it helps more than just me. But as we have this changing way of looking at households and families and firms, and we all found each other, so we're somehow involved in the narrative anyways, but if you don't take economics in college, or maybe you do take economics, but you had to and you forgot about it and you don't remember what the main takeaways were except for supply and demand, how do we get this message out to, I guess, the masses as young researchers and scholars?
Right. I'm here, even if my camera for some reason is switched off. So I just move the word to Olena. So the floor is yours.
Can you hear me now? I'm very curious about the question that Tracy. And excuse me, I've got a lot of light. It's almost 5 p.m. here in Rome. My name is Elena. I'm a PhD student at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. And I'm very grateful for your lecture. And I would like to share some reflections and ask some different questions. Like the first thing, I would just say thank you for it being so human, and it is actually for integral and solidary humanism. And for me as Christian, it was a pleasure to listen to it. And the first reflection I would like to share is how close it is to the Christian social thought, like to the values, the key values such as justice, truth, freedom, and to the principles such as, firstly, respect of human dignity, solidarity, the common good. And it was a pleasure to listen to it. And I really liked that husbandry image, and it struck me. And I was thinking of if we might develop and generate some wifery image, an image of a wife who might be that kind of image that can make an impact into the new economy, that can bring care, that can be a constructive and structural element of the new economy. And I would like also to emphasize that in my understanding, the part of family solidarity that was very closely associated to that image of husbandry, the one that you proposed, very close to the one in Christian social thought, when we're talking about solidarity in family, because if the family is formed on love, born in love, grown in love, solidarity belongs to the family, and they then become an element of our economic system, because everything is somehow related to something else. And this core, this heart, can really make a true impact. So I really hope it will, and I really hope we might be the ones who does it, who formulates it, who brings this image to people. And in my village, Women for Economy, we've been talking so much about the image. If economy was a woman, how much different it would be, and how much family solidarity would change the whole economic system we are in right now. So, and I would like to ask you a question of what we, Women for Economy, young researchers, must do next. What would be your concrete recommendation of action, of research? Maybe we can address it in some interesting, different way that would bring something new, something that can change and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, Elena. Relation to Christian social thought, certainly. I did my graduate work at University of Wisconsin-Madison and did some research into the history of the department. It was founded by Richard T. Ely and with his student, John R. Commons. John R. Commons has a book called something like Christian Social Thought and Economics or something like that. Anyway, they were both very involved in this and taught it on what was called the Chautauqua Circuit. They were some of the originators of what's called the old institutionalist school of economics, which I think has some of the better approaches to economy. It recognizes it as being, economy is being made out of people and actual organizations. So yeah, definitely a lot of parallels. When you went with that, you talked about the image of husbandry. I thought you were going to go in another direction, which is you certainly, I mean, in Christianity, there's certainly a very strong image of the good shepherd, right?
Yes.
So if you're going to aspire,
the sheep, you know, the one that takes the smell, like who's shepherding, but still very close to the people whom the one is
right,
with whom you're like teaching. And you've been talking about teaching economics. I think that image would be like perfect when you need to communicate new economy, new understanding. That image, like that metaphor, very biblical, but very clear and so close to us. Yeah. I think it can be a very good example, like best practice.
In terms of creating a wife imagery, I don't really see that for a couple of reasons. One is, I think the wife, the common understanding of wife is already very much associated with care and not with economics. I think it's pretty close to that original mom and baby view. And there's nothing wrong with mom and babies, but it's going to be really hard to think about economics exactly in those terms. A second idea is we talk about family and love and solidarity. And we really want that in our families, and we want to encourage that in our families and make that possible in families. And it doesn't always happen in families. Just read the newspaper about domestic violence and child abuse. Okay, so this is where I said, like, competition and cooperation. Don't think that one sphere is all about one and all about the other. I'm afraid the family is not just about that. So we have these ideals. And they're great to have as ideals, but when you try to do social analysis with those ideals, you have to question them. You have to say, is the family, really, could we take the family as it actually is as an ideal for an economy? I'd say, no, I'd rather not get hit. That's part of why I can't take the family as an ideal for an economy. We do have to take as our ideal is what you mentioned as the principles of Christian social thought, respect for each other. Common good, those kinds of things. And we have to use those as our ideals, whether we're talking about economy or family. They don't happen automatically anywhere. They have to be worked for everywhere.
Thank you.
I see we're almost out of time, which would be a good excuse for me to not answer the last question about what groups, what should young researchers be doing next. Actually, I think a lot of that is really, up to you, your situation where you are. Some of you, may work in nonprofits. Some of you may start new businesses. Some of you may advise governments. Some of you may take care of children. Whatever your path is for your life, you've already, got a lot of the values you need. This kind of seminar is, helping you with maybe some of the other kinds of knowledge you need. I hope I've, contributed a drop here. But you got to find your own path. I found mine, and yours is going to be yours. Any way I can help or encourage you in that, I'm happy to, but I can't point you. You need to do the pointing.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I'm sorry, and I apologize with Tracy. She posed a question, but I got messed up with my webcam, so I couldn't realize, and I moved on. So let's go back to Tracy's question. And perhaps actually, can I ask you, at least for myself, I wasn't listening, I'm caring about my website. If you can repeat that. If you can repeat your question to Professor.
I think the question is about how to reach young researchers with all of this. Is that correct, Tracy? Or do you want to repeat it otherwise?
Oh, no, just, yeah, I mean, you kind of just answered part of it. Like, as young researchers, how do we reach, like, I guess, people that might not have access to these ideas, right? So, like, we all found each other, but, like, how, if you don't take an economics class, or if you don't go to college at all, or maybe you don't, everybody has a different situation. And I think, to your point, find your own path. But yeah, how would you recommend that we try and reach out to different populations of people?
Well, I think that the real ecological crisis we're in has gotten a lot of younger people pretty fed up with the way things are. I know some polls in the U.S. have shown that the beliefs among younger folks, even from fairly conservative areas in the U.S., split the most on things like taking climate change seriously. They may have conservative ideals, for example, and a lot of other things, but some of them are more willing to look at the science. So there are, I mean, I did my little drop on textbooks. If some of you want to write, letters to the editor and become journalists and cover things differently, start new newspapers, start new online ways of communication. There's, I am not I'm an academic. I'm afraid that, sort of the distribution aspects are not my specialty. So I will have to leave it to someone cleverer than me to figure all of that out.
All right, we have perhaps time for a few questions. There have been many great questions on the chat, but let me choose one which is related to what we have just discussed, at least a little bit. So there is this question from Rodrigo Bidubula, if I pronounce it correctly, which asks, Professor Nelson, thanks for this presentation. In our African countries, many ONGs are busy in taking care of the nature in special way in rural regions. Some people, pygmies, have been put outside from their natural ecosystem. What do you think about the relationship between taking care of nature and indigenous people in respect of their ecosystems?
Yeah, well, I think that opening quote by Pope Francis said it well. You can't really take care of the ecology without taking care of the people. The issue of marginalized people and the issue of survival are very close together. And the example Rodrigo raises is one of these. I know that some countries have had success with trying to more closely align preservation activities, environmental preservation activities with economic interests. For example, people who were formerly poaching because they needed to feed their families, being paid to be essentially park rangers and protecting the livestock from poaching. You can't just go in and say, the antelope are more important than you people, human beings. That's not going to work. I'm afraid I don't know the specific case that Rodrigo addressed, but I think that opening quote by Pope Francis says it well. These things have to go together. You can't just roll over marginalized people to save some charismatic mega species.
All right, so there was a question on the financial crisis, which let me see if I find it again. Oh. Maybe in the meanwhile, if there is one of the discussants here on Zoom who have a second question, Serena, Olona. Olena, sorry.
Here I am.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question connected to interreligious dialogue. And our village, Women for Economy, pays particular attention to the last encyclical letter of the Holy Father Francis, Fratelli Tutti. We organized a reading group and we've been elaborating projects very relevant to this encyclical letter. But if we're looking at interreligious dialogue for economic development, considering the fact that all religious leaders are men, the question of gender equality is not on the first place. Maybe you might have some recommendation to us as Women for Economy researchers who were called by the Holy Father. How can we attract more attention to these bias of implementation of interreligious dialogue?
Ooh, that's a really tough one. And I'm afraid this one where I really have to leave it to others. I think I am not Catholic myself, and I think those of you who are have a particularly tough road on this matter. And I wish you luck. I would like to give you support. I have no idea how you're going to do it. I'm sorry, I can't say, can't be more helpful than that.
Thank you. I have some ideas and I'm trying to make a research at that, but I think the part of caring in economics is very relevant to different religions. So, and I think we can find the human part in most of them. So reciprocity, different teachings of traditions that can be brought together for the new economy is something that we should do, something that we lay people can do with our hands. But gender equality, unfortunately, is not on the first place of discussion, let's say. And in my understanding, it's difficult to be speaking about economic development without role of women on leading position, on development position, and the impact a woman can make should be recognized and should be recognized on different levels. So I really hope we'll manage to do that.
Yeah, I would say that within economics, development economics has probably come the farthest in taking seriously certain kinds of feminist points. That is, development economics often used to immediately assume that the male in the family was the farmer and the producer, even though a lot of places there's really the women that did most of the farming. These kinds of things. There has been a lot more recognition that women are producers of many things. That education for women and girls is very important for any kind of economic development. And that has gotten, I don't think a lot of the international, say, development agencies anymore, you can put forth proposals that don't have some kind of gender section and talk about gender impacts. That is not true of, feels like macroeconomics or finance or a lot of other areas of economics. So from the economic side, there has been progress towards that. From the sort of the interreligious dialogue side, some religions have made gender equality more of a priority than others, but overall it can still be an uphill struggle.
All right, thank you very much. So I think we are really out of time now, so I thank everybody who has participated to this lecture. Before the end, I have to give the last and final word to Paolo, who needs to make some announcement for the next lecture. But I say hello in advance to everybody, and thanks again. Paolo.
Yes, I think you cannot see me, but at least you can hear me, which is enough for now also, because sometimes technology dominates us in this. But no, just to conclude, I mean, this has been a beautiful webinar also for the, okay, I can start my video now. Okay, both from the guest speech, which has been amazing. I mean, I received a lot of message on the phone about awesome, what a lesson. These are really, and also for the discussant. So I think that Professor Judy Nelson also enjoyed the conversation with our discussants. And I have two announcements to do. First of all the questions you are doing, you're on the chat, on YouTube and Zoom, they will not be wasted. We will using them at the workshop. Because, you know, we are going to do a workshop in which we all meet together and discuss the ideas that we are listening from such illustrious keynote speakers. So the first workshop has been moved from the 7th of April to the 21st of April. So we moved the workshop so that we can include also the fourth lesson. This actually is my second announcement. The next lesson is on the 14th of April. We will have Sabina Al-Khair from the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. She will be lecturing us on multidimensional forms of poverty, which is an important and very difficult topic. So it will be very, very interesting. And so, I mean, I don't know, to conclude, Professor Julie Nelson, thanks for having been with us, and let's keep in contact. I mean, this is not the end. Hopefully it's the beginning of something. And so really, thanks, and thanks all to the discussants and Matteo and Professor Bruni and all the people who are following this lesson here on Zoom and on YouTube. So I'll see you all at the next lesson. Bye.